Hello. Today General Hospital will reveal for the longest time, Sasha had believed Micheal to be the safest anchor for Daisy, a father figure who, no matter the chaos surrounding their lives in Port Charles, would never do anything to harm the little girl or anyone he professed to love. She had clung to that image of him as steady and principled, a man shaped by loss and redemption. Micheal had stood beside her when she lost Leah Mike, offering support without judgment. She had trusted that the Micheal she knew, the one who held Daisy gently, who whispered promises of protection and stability, would never waver from those values. But that image had begun to fracture, slowly and painfully, with every warning Willow whispered in desperation and every accusation that trembled on her lips. Willow had told Sasha that Micheal had a pattern of cutting people out of his life the moment they no longer served his agenda. She insisted that his custody of Amelia and Wiley wasn't rooted in love but in bitterness, that he had weaponized his pain into control. Sasha had resisted believing it at first, instinctively defensive of Micheal, but then the signs began surfacing like cracks in a frozen lake. She noticed how cold he had become with Willow, denying her reasonable visitation, speaking of parenting not as a bond but as a negotiation. His concern for Daisy, once comforting, had become possessive, obsessive even. When Sasha traced his past, she began seeing the remnants of people Micheal had quietly removed from his world the moment they threatened his control. That realization ignited something ancient and powerful in her, the primal instinct of a mother sensing danger circling her child. News soon surfaced about Drew and a scheme to fabricate medical records that would paint Micheal as an unfit, opioid-addicted father. Sasha, already rattled by Michael's behavior, saw the trap being set. At first, she prepared to leave quietly, to gather Daisy and vanish before the shadow of another battle could touch them. She envisioned a life far from Port Charles, far from legacy families and blood feuds. But when she looked at Daisy, bright-eyed, innocent, unscarred, she hesitated. In her daughter's gaze, she saw the same unwavering trust she had once placed in Micheal. And it was then, in a moment of brutal clarity, that Sasha realized she couldn't leave. Not because she still trusted Micheal, but because she couldn't allow a child, his child, her child, to suffer for the sins of adults waging wars in the dark. So she stayed, even as fear roiled in her gut. With quiet urgency, she dug through phone logs, encrypted emails, and coerced conversations. Eventually, Sasha uncovered what she had feared and expected. Portia had not acted on medical ethics, but under duress. Pressured by Drew, she had altered Michael's records to suggest addiction. Sasha took the evidence to Jason, knowing he was the only one who could act swiftly and silently. Jason, who had already begun sensing something amiss, used Sasha's proof to expose the scheme before it could go public. The fallout was immediate. Drew was disgraced, forced to resign from Aurora amid public backlash. His plan to paint Micheal as a danger had collapsed before the ink dried. But victory came at a cost. In the aftermath, as headlines praised Micheal for clearing his name, Sasha couldn't bring herself to celebrate. She had saved him, yes, but she had also seen him clearly for the first time, and what she saw frightened her. The manipulation, the strategic silence, the way he used Daisy's love like a shield, all of it left her hollow. Micheal had survived the attack, but the man she had once trusted was gone. She could not unsee the cold calculation behind his eyes, nor the subtle but undeniable erosion of compassion in his choices. Her decision to help him had been for Daisy, not for him. And now that the storm had passed, she knew she had to go. She didn't say goodbye. She packed only what she needed, took Daisy by the hand, and left. No forwarding address. No phone number. No confrontation. Only a letter folded neatly on Michael's desk, with a few lines that read more like a whisper than a farewell. I need time to protect her from things I don't yet understand. Please don't look for us. Micheal found the letter the next morning, and though he said nothing, the weight in his chest told him the truth. Sasha hadn't just left Port Charles, she had left him. For good. Willow, standing on the porch with a bouquet of flowers meant to apologize, saw him reading the letter and knew she had lost something too. In trying to hurt Micheal, she had struck herself. Her alliance with Drew, her spite disguised as concern, had cost her not only her place in Michael's life but her access to her children and any redemption with Sasha. She had gambled and lost. She watched as Micheal set the letter down with trembling hands and didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. Elsewhere, Portia resigned quietly from the hospital, leaving behind a shattered office and a fractured conscience. Stella turned her attention to the growing web of corruption that Drew had left in his wake, realizing the scheme had likely extended far beyond one medical file. Jason, wary of deeper threats, kept his investigation alive. Nina, still entangled in the politics of Sonny's empire, withdrew from Drew's orbit, her own regrets festering in silence. But for Sasha, the choice had never been about revenge or power. It had been about clarity, about knowing when to fight, and when to run. She and Daisy settled in a quiet coastal town, far from the shadows of Port Charles. Every night, she held her daughter and reminded herself that she hadn't fled out of fear, but out of love. She didn't know if she would ever return. But she did know this. She had once put her faith in a man who didn't deserve it, and now she would never let anyone come between her and Daisy again. Back in Port Charles, Micheal stood alone, vindicated, victorious, but utterly alone. He had defended his name, crushed his enemies, and protected his daughter. But he had done it at the cost of the one woman who had saved him without asking for anything in return. And perhaps, in the silence left behind by Sasha's absence, he finally understood the kind of man he had become. In the weeks that followed the collapse of Drew's elaborate deception, the atmosphere in Port Charles remained heavy, like the stillness before a second, more devastating storm. The damage had been done, not just to reputations, but to the fragile web of trust that held General Hospital and its surrounding community together. Portia, once hailed as one of the most principled physicians in the institution, became the epicenter of a moral and ethical scandal. Her name, once spoken with admiration in the hospital's halls, now echoed only in whispers of betrayal and disbelief. After confessing to her role in altering Michael's medical records under coercion, Portia withdrew entirely. Her resignation came not with a dramatic press conference, but with a simple letter, quiet, remorseful, and riddled with guilt. She didn't just resign from General Hospital, she stepped back from her entire life. Friends and colleagues reached out, but she answered no one. Her apartment sat dark and silent, her phone left unanswered. She retreated into solitude, trying to reconcile her belief that she had been doing what was necessary to protect her daughter with the chilling reality that she had violated every oath she had ever taken. Her inner world fractured under the weight of her own conscience, and she quietly slipped out of public life, unsure if she would ever return. Meanwhile, Stella, who had watched the entire debacle unfold from a careful distance, began to connect the dots that others had missed. Where others saw Drew as a desperate man acting alone, Stella saw patterns, inconsistencies, and unexplained behavior that pointed to something deeper, more calculated. She began to unearth archived communications and compare procedural shifts that had taken place during Drew's tenure. She discovered that similar manipulations, altered test results, undocumented patient transfers, financial grants from obscure foundations, had occurred in waves across the past few years, most of them buried beneath layers of bureaucracy and internal audits. Her investigation soon revealed that General Hospital was being used as a pawn in a far more dangerous game. A covert program quietly harvesting patient data, experimenting with psychological profiling, and testing the limits of medical ethics in exchange for anonymous funding. Drew had been just one operative in a larger scheme. He wasn't the mastermind, he was the puppet. And Stella, horrified, realized that the people pulling the strings were still in place, still watching, and still manipulating from behind the curtain. It was a chilling discovery that forced her to abandon the idea of transparency. This would have to be handled from the shadows, quietly, methodically, just as the enemy had done. Nina, tangled in her own political fallout, faced scrutiny from every direction. Though she had severed her romantic connection with Drew the moment she suspected his intentions, the press was relentless. Her business connections to Aurora were questioned. Her personal loyalty to Sonny was used as a weapon against her. Political rivals saw her as a liability, while media commentators painted her as complicit, if not manipulative in her own right. She tried to maintain control, organizing charity events, issuing public statements, and conducting interviews, but the effort was visibly wearing on her. Her allies were thinning, her influence dwindling, and every move she made felt like it was under a microscope. Behind closed doors, she began to question whether it was even possible to maintain her identity in a world that demanded she choose between power and redemption. Through all of this, Jason remained the quiet observer, the unwavering shadow moving between factions, gathering intel, and piecing together the truth. He knew that Drew's downfall was only the beginning, a crack in the dam that threatened to give way to a flood. When Sasha left with Daisy, he followed from afar. Not to stop her, but to ensure she wasn't being followed by someone else. Jason understood the stakes better than anyone. He had seen what happened when powerful forces used families and children as leverage. And he had no doubt that Sasha and Daisy could still be targets, if not for vengeance, then for silence. After confirming their safety, Jason returned to Port Charles and set to work. He reactivated dormant contacts from his WSB days, leaned on former informants, and dove into encrypted communications unearthed from hospital servers. What he uncovered was staggering. There was evidence of a covert initiative, one cloaked under the guise of medical advancement but operating with motives far darker. Patient files were being cross-referenced with behavioral assessments, drug prescriptions manipulated to monitor compliance and neurological changes, and psychological stressors introduced to provoke measurable reactions. All of it done quietly, under the radar, and funded by offshore corporations tied to anonymous trusts. Jason knew this wasn't just about Micheal. This was about control. This was about building profiles, testing reactions, and manipulating people under the pretense of care. And it had been happening right under everyone's noses. He found references to Project Halcyon, an initiative that predated Drew and extended far beyond Port Charles. General Hospital had become a test site. And the worst part? Many of the hospital's own staff had no idea they had been participating in something so unethical and dangerous. They had been lured in by grants, promotions, and vague corporate partnerships, never realizing they were contributing to a larger experiment. Jason understood he couldn't fight this alone. He reached out to Anna, who had been conducting her own investigations into WSB splinter factions. Together, they began compiling evidence, building a case that, once made public, would shake the medical and intelligence communities to their foundations. But for now, they kept their moves quiet. If they exposed too much too soon, the people behind Project Halcyon would scatter, burn records, and vanish. Meanwhile, Sasha, far from the chaos, found a semblance of peace. The coastal town where she settled was quiet, untouched by legacy wars or media scrutiny. Daisy thrived in the open air, her laughter returning in ways Sasha hadn't seen in months. But even in this haven, Sasha couldn't shake the feeling that the past would come calling again. She had left not out of fear, but because she knew she had to break the cycle before it consumed her daughter too. She didn't regret helping Micheal, but she would never forget what it cost her. Her love had been tested, broken, and reshaped into something stronger, something more protective, more discerning. And as the sun set over the water each evening, she reminded herself that if the day ever came when Daisy needed defending again, she would be ready. No matter how far she had to go or what she had to sacrifice. Because now, she no longer played the role of the grieving widow or the dependent partner. She was something else entirely, a mother with nothing to lose and everything to fight for. Back in Port Charles, the battle lines were redrawn not with bullets, but with silence, surveillance, and suspicion. Jason and Anna prepared for war in the shadows. Stella continued her underground investigation. Nina fought to maintain a crumbling public image. And Micheal, unaware of the greater storm brewing, stood alone in his restored empire, not realizing that the very system he believed he triumphed over was only retreating to strike again. Life in exile, though peaceful, was never truly detached from the undercurrents of pain that had led Sasha and Daisy to leave Port Charles. In the sleepy seaside town where they now lived, each day unfolded with the simplicity Sasha had once thought impossible. Mornings filled with homemade breakfasts and sunbeams dancing across whitewashed kitchen walls, afternoons spent collecting shells and teaching Daisy to read her first words, and evenings wrapped in the rhythmic lull of ocean waves. There were no reporters at her doorstep, no emergency phone calls from General Hospital, no guarded glances exchanged in town squares full of history and betrayal. Here, they were nameless. Here, they were safe. And yet, not a day passed without the echo of everything Sasha had left behind reverberating quietly through her soul. Though she made every effort to embrace the present, there were nights when memory sank its teeth into her, cruel and persistent. The stillness of her new life often served as a contrast so stark it magnified all she had endured in Port Charles, the betrayals, the losses, the exhausting complexity of loving someone like Micheal. She had believed him to be her redemption, the second chance she never thought she'd be granted after Mike's death. But over time, that illusion had crumbled beneath the weight of his choices, his controlling nature, and his calculated silences. She had seen him turn from the wounded man she'd held in hospital corridors into a cold architect of custody battles and public relations strategies. What remained was not love, it was strategy, distance, and power. From a distance, she watched him rise. Though she no longer had access to the town's private whispers, the public headlines told a story of a man becoming a symbol, of stability, of leadership, of uncompromising vision. Micheal had turned the chaos of Drew's scandal into a platform, refashioning himself as the unwavering head of the Corinthos family's corporate and philanthropic arms. He gave speeches now, crisp and rehearsed. He made appearances at fundraisers and charity galas. The media began referring to him as Port Charles's Iron Son, a nod to his resilience, and a chilling reminder of how steel his heart had become. But Sasha knew better. She recognized the look in his eyes in every photo the news outlets published, the tightness in his jaw, the way he held his hands, always clenched just out of frame. These were not the signs of strength. They were the tells of a man barely holding himself together, erecting walls so high he could no longer see who was on the other side. He was no longer fighting battles, he was ruling a kingdom of isolation. Willow, on the other hand, had become a shadow even Sasha struggled to trace. Her descent from a vocal, principled force into near invisibility had been rapid and quiet. No longer the moral compass that once tried to guide both Micheal and Drew, Willow seemed to have drifted into the margins of Port Charles' life, swallowed by shame and regret. Public events she once championed now passed without her involvement. Even in press photos, when she appeared, it was with distant eyes and a forced smile. Her fall had not been scandalous, it had been slow, sad, and unspoken. And though Sasha had once felt hurt, even betrayed by Willow's role in the chaos that followed, now she only felt a distant kind of pity. She understood what it meant to lose yourself in trying to protect something that no longer deserved your defense. Sasha would often sit by the window after Daisy had gone to bed, sipping tea gone cold in her hands, and wonder how many other women Port Charles had broken before they learned to walk away. She wasn't naive enough to believe she was the first to be chewed up and spat out by its power structures, but she hoped, perhaps desperately, that she would be one of the last. Her new life was not glamorous, but it was honest. There were no more masks to wear, no agendas to serve. She worked part-time at a small bookstore in town, stocked shelves in the morning, and read bedtime stories by night. Daisy was thriving. Laughing more, asking fewer questions about her father, and adapting to a world where love didn't come with conditions or consequences. And yet, even amid this peace, Sasha felt a tension lying dormant beneath her ribs, a pressure like something coiled, waiting. She had left for Daisy's safety, yes, but also because she knew that staying would have forced her to become someone she didn't recognize, someone hardened, bitter, and lost. She had chosen hope. But Port Charles was not a city that let its ghosts go. It had a way of clawing through time and distance to pull its survivors back. Whether through tragedy, duty, or vengeance, it always found a way to summon those it had marked. Sometimes she dreamt of returning. Not out of longing, but as a specter. In her dreams, she didn't return to beg forgiveness or reclaim anything she'd left behind. She returned prepared for battle, with a mind sharpened by betrayal and a heart armored in purpose. She imagined standing in front of Micheal, no longer the woman he had manipulated, no longer the silent partner in a war she hadn't agreed to fight. She would come back with her own voice, her own terms, and with Daisy behind her, never again at the mercy of someone else's definition of family. And deep down, Sasha knew that one day the call would come, not a phone call, but a shift. A crisis. A reckoning. Port Charles would descend into chaos once more, and the people she had loved, hated, and survived would find themselves ensnared in a storm only she could weather. And when that day came, she would not hesitate. She would not question whether she was strong enough. Because now, she had something she hadn't possessed before, clarity. She understood who she was, what she stood for, and what she would never allow to happen again.